I'm delighted to welcome back Jack Tame and our fantastic lineup of panelists who are going to talk through building consumer confidence.
E mihi ana ki te rangi, mihi ana ki te whenua, I mihi ana ki ngā tupuna I te pō, I mihi ana ki ngā uri te awātea, tēnā koutou katoa, kia ore te iwi ko haere mai nei. Ki tēnei hui, ki te haukainga o tēnei wahi, Ngāti whātua ōrākei, tēnā koutou katoa. Ki ngā kai whakarite o te hui, e mihi nui ana ki a koutou, mā ki ngā kai kōrero kua tai mai, haere, haere, haere. Nā reira ki a tātou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. These are tricky times. Inflation's at 6% from its historic lows just a couple of years ago. RBNZ has had the OCR on a rapid tightening cycle. Those who locked in at something starting with a 2 just a couple of years ago are refixing at something starting with a 7, gulp, and watching their asset values decline steadily at the same time. Off the back of COVID, a lot of young people are pouring out of New Zealand on their OEs, making up for their lost years and in search of greener pastures. The labour market still has its challenges, and we are in a global war for talent. Whether justified or not, there is a general sense of collective malaise at the moment. A fog, a funk. It feels to many Kiwis as though, I don't know, we've lost our collective mojo. So in this morning's first all-star panel, we're going to hear from a range of thought leaders as we ask a key question. Is consumer confidence broken in New Zealand? If so, why? And if so, what do we do about it? The way this will work is I will begin by introducing each of our respective panelists. I'll throw them each a question. Then we'll work through a range of topic areas. And once again, I would invite you to send through any specific questions you have for the panel, and I'll get to those very shortly. So I'm going to begin down the end, if I can, with Andrew Inwood, who is, of course, the CEO of CoreData. Thanks for being with us, Andrew. My question for you is if you can just talk us through what the data is saying locally and globally.
The data's not great either locally or globally, but what's happened around the world is that the world is really fractured into very different economies, and some are moving at different paces and different speeds. The point that Jack was talking about earlier about the way that confidence works in markets is not new, and it's not poorly understood. I'm asked a bit about New Zealand and how it's going when I'm travelling overseas, because I'm from Australia, so therefore I must know about New Zealand. So I want to make it really clear. I was born in Papakura and my iwi are up from Whakatane, so I know a little bit about this, and I was out last night drinking Chinese beer and eating Chinese with my local family here, which was great fun. But the reality is the confidence is a game about the thinking about the future and the way in which it works, and it's reasonably well constructed and reasonably well understood, although not well distributed amongst humans. And so this kind of one of the most powerful constructs of confidence in large economies is authenticity, the authenticity and predictability drivers. And authenticity is a pretty easy thing to understand, is are you who you say you are, and do you do what you say you're going to do? And that's a bit broken in this economy at the moment for a bunch of reasons, and it's a bit broken globally. So the world is starting to shatter on that space. The other thing that's happened is, as people start to think about the future, they're always looking for the future constructs of value, and they're shifted really rapidly in the last decade. And New Zealand is potentially a little bit behind that, although it's very well educated. And as I say to the Americans in the English, a lot of people have gone bad betting against the Kiwis, so I wouldn't be doing that at the moment. So it's going to be challenging, but there obviously appears to be a plan, and I've talked for too long already, so back to you with that, Jack.
Very good. Thank you. Simone Robbers is quite a title, Simone, eh? The Assistant Governor and GM of Strategy, Governance and Sustainability at Te Pūtea Matua, the Reserve Bank of New Zealand. Simone, thanks for being with us. How do you assess things, and how does RBNZ fit into the confidence question?
Yeah, thank you, Jack. And look, just to be clear, I need to stay in my swim lanes today, obviously, so I've got my notes.
You can't just give us a little preview of 2 o'clock this afternoon. Just
No. But you do have an amazing panel of economists later on today, and then you'll have our Deputy Governor Christian talking to you tomorrow, so you can fully unwrap the decision. But in terms of the Reserve Bank, I mean, not to downplay the challenging economic and social conditions we have at the moment, we do think there is a reason to be optimistic and a lot of opportunity here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And look, I do feel, looking around the room, that is why you are all here. We have in our remit well-being and prosperity of all New Zealanders and contributing to a sustainable and productive economy. So that's our reason for being, that is our legislative purpose, and I feel that we share that. So that is why you are here, is to promote great customer outcomes for your clients, access to financial services and products. So, I feel that we have a lot of opportunity here in New Zealand at the moment and a lot of reasons to look forward with some optimism.
Kia ora, Simone. Naomi Ballantyne is the founder and managing partner of Partners Life. Kia ora. Naomi, how do you assess the current state of affairs? How do you rate consumer confidence in New Zealand?
Yeah, that's interesting, because for me, I see it from not the political level, but the behavioural level of consumers and customers. And I think the things that drive confidence for consumers is that they have confidence that they can afford the lifestyle that they have. There's no threat to that. And that they've got confidence that they can improve that over time. And the thing that we see Kiwis do cyclically, so I've been through a lot of cycles of loss of confidence, is that they do exactly the wrong thing when things get tight. The thing that gives you confidence when there's a crisis is that you have a plan, and insurance is a plan, and KiwiSaver is a plan. Retirement savings are plans. They're the first things that people stop. They still go to restaurants. They go on holidays like they are at the moment, even though you hear this lack of confidence, and they cut the very things that should give them the confidence that they can manage those two things. So, for me, it's how do we change that headset in New Zealand? It's nothing more than that.
Yeah. Dr. Pushpa Wood is the Director of the Financial Education and Research Centre at Massey University. Kia ora, Pushpa.
Kia ora.
When we talk about consumer confidence, what do we actually mean by that term?
Good question, Jake. That's what I've been pondering on. I was looking at your title, Building Consumer Confidence. What exactly are we talking about? Is it not there and therefore we want to build it? Or do we want to extend it? Do we want to strengthen it? Or do we want to have a total reset of consumer confidence? Right? I noticed one very, very interesting thing. This morning I attended Women in Super session. There was only one brave man who was interested to hear your 50% of consumers. What do they actually think about? If you cannot even build the confidence of 50% of your consumers, you are in serious trouble. And that's my challenge to you. Those of you who were here last year heard me. I will be tackling you during breaks to find out, because I did issue you an open challenge, do something. Don't talk about it. There are obvious facts we all know, right? But what actually does it mean? What does it mean to you? As a consumer, it means to me, I can rely on what you're saying to me. You can prove it to me that it means something to me. It will be beneficial for me, and it will help me where I want to get. Not that it will sell your product, or not that it will help your bottom line. As a consumer, I'm not interested in your bottom line. I'm interested in my benefit from buying your product or your service.
Thanks, Pushpa. We can always rely on Pushpa to bring the fire, can't we? She said to me before this, you have the little briefing, and Pushpa's like, I'll push the boat out. That's what I'm going to do. We love it. Kris Faafoi is a former Cabinet Minister and the Director of Agenda Partners. Kia ora, Kris. How do you state the current how do you assess the current state of affairs, and what is government's role in promoting stronger consumer confidence?
Look, I think credibility and sustainability and some certainty around either policy settings or regulation, I think that's really important now. With things looking, as I said yesterday, grumpy and lumpy and probably that way for some time, knee-jerk reactions in terms of regulation policy, I think this room would prefer not to happen. And I think if this room would have confidence around that, then I think that gives some certainty to their customer base as well. The other thing I think, and I think it's to Naomi and Pushpa's point, is understanding right now that while New Zealand households are feeling things quite tight at the moment, how do we actually grow from that? Because at this point of time, I think Kiwi households more than ever are watching their dollars and cents very closely, and it's one of the kind of fundamental issues that the FSC is looking at as blueprint for growth. So, it's not about the next 2 or 3 years about how Kiwi households look after their finances. It's well beyond that too. So I think there's actually an opportunity in there as people are watching what they do with their money very closely. It's not just to do it while the times are tough. It's how do you look at that when times get better, hopefully.
Talk to us about that a bit more. Where do you see the opportunity as being?
Look, I was always a keen fan of making sure that the sector, consumers and government were happy in this triangle of opportunity for business, protection and investment for consumers, and hopefully if you've got the wider settings for the likes of KiwiSaver, you can kind of have as Grant said before, have a relatively set and forget debate. I was in one of the sessions yesterday around KiwiSaver, again inspired by Pushpa. There's lots of things that we're debating around tinkering, but where's the vision about what KiwiSaver could be, and frame it in a way that isn't necessarily about marketing a product, but where's the investment in transport or infrastructure that could happen as a result. I think people will buy into that as opposed to someone's turning out to get more money into my KiwiSaver.
Nice. Hey guys, what I'm going to do is I will encourage you over the next half an hour or so, if there's any point you want to pick up on, don't wait for me to call out your name. Just pick up and add to that point. And I think we should talk about opportunity and some reasons to be optimistic a bit more, perhaps in the second half of the session. Pushpa, a question for you. How does confidence differ between public and private sectors?
Okay, let me talk about the public sector. Public sector confidence means I, as a consumer, have a confidence in my government, in the policy, and in the institutions, the regulatory institutions, that they are on the right track. And not only the policy and procedures, but they have me, as a consumer, right at the middle of their thinking and their policy design. Sometimes I wonder whether we need to actually send our policy advisors and policy writers and makers into ground for a few days or few weeks of reality check of how people actually live before they design the policy for the public. In terms of our private sector, as a consumer, I have challenges. I have a lot of challenges, whether you realize it or not. I have a challenge, why should I buy your product? How do I change? There are so many. Which one is best for me? How do I decide that? Who tells me to decide that? And who is objective enough to tell me that? I have a challenge in terms of how do I suss out your reputation, right? How do I know you will deliver to what? And what is that you are offering as you that is different to 15 others that have also approached me? And my reality check usually is when somebody approaches me, I usually say to them, in 30 seconds, tell me why I should come to your shop than going to your next door neighbor. If you cannot tell me in 30 seconds, I'm not interested, right? If you as a sector are busy people, so am I as a consumer very busy. All right? I have similar challenges. So in terms of your sector, looking around the room, I'm really pleased to see the gender balance is really increasing. Where's your ethnicity balance? Your population of, your demographics is changing as we speak. What are you doing to understand that demographic change that is happening as you're sitting in this room? How are you going to reflect? How will you win my confidence, a brown face from Asian background, to say that you really understand my need. You're not selling me a product, you are actually selling me how best I can serve my need. So in other words, if you're going to sell me an insurance product, for example, what I want to know is, you ask me one simple question: what do you want to protect? What is the most important thing in your life? And then you offer me how best I can protect what is most important for me in my life. Thank you.
Very good.
I think Pushpa makes a great point there around policymakers getting out and about and on the ground. Recently we had a lot of problems with the resilience of the cash system with the North Island weather events. So we know we've got a lot of work to do there with the banking industry and with our own cash system. So what you'll see us doing in the next few months is getting out into communities with cash trials and understanding what the cash needs are in those communities. So I think that's a great point in terms of policy design, Pushpa, and there's a few other initiatives in that space as well.
Yeah, I think let's pick up on that, because I'd like to talk about some businesses that are perhaps using some specific examples of businesses that are helping to build consumer confidence at this time. But Simone, can you build on that a bit for us and talk to us about the progress around the Future of Money program?
Yeah, sure. So Future of Money, Te Moni Anamata, we've been looking at that for quite some time. Obviously, you see falling cash in circulation, but levels of cash are still much relied on in certain communities. So certainly in those recent weather events, we had difficulty getting cash into communities, and a lot of that was resilience and disaster recovery plans of the institutions themselves, and others were just roading infrastructure issues. So we don't want to be in that position again. Obviously, we're talking a lot about central bank digital currencies as well. So there are a number of pieces to the puzzle, if you like, but certainly at the moment the focus is on cash resilience and making sure that our communities can access what they need, both in good times and in times of crisis.
Naomi also.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I was just going to pick up on some things that Pushpa also said, because I don't see our customers thinking about government policy to give them confidence.
They don't care about it.
Yeah, I see our customers saying, oops, things are getting tight. That insurance premium, I didn't know I needed it. I don't really want to pay it. I don't really understand what it's going to do for me, so I'll cancel that. And being on the payment end of people who are just desperately grateful when they do get paid, when they suddenly realise what their life would have been like without that money, which doesn't make them richer, just stands them still instead of sliding backwards while they deal with terrible things. So I have the pleasure of being at that pointy end when the thing happens. The problem for New Zealanders is we don't talk about money. Families don't talk about money. We sure as heck don't talk about insurance. We think it's scary. We don't understand it. And so we run away from it. And there's never been a government until the Labour government started to talk about the insurance scheme that said you should have insurance. We've done KiwiSaver a little bit. We stepped into it. We haven't gone anywhere further since then. But KiwiSaver said to every employer, you should tell your people they should have a retirement plan. You should give them access to advice about that. And you should make the pathway for paying for it easy. And we have people with KiwiSaver. Account balances growing rapidly. We didn't have any of those before. And we do zero of that in the other parts of the financial services space. So we don't tell New Zealanders, here's a plan, and it's an important plan, and you will be grateful to have this when it happens. We don't say anything as governments, and then we step in and say, but the government can do it for you. Kind of there's a whole world between at least tell them they should have it, this is what insurance does, go and talk to someone and learn.
I hate to interrupt, and one of the things that no one in the world really wants is someone from another country coming and tell them how to run their economy. But there's a bunch of fundamental problems that we're having with this conversation. Confidence is constructed from the ability for people to reliably plan their future, and income is a really big, important part of that. That exists as a statement inside Milton Friedman's thesis, which was written in the late 1940s and founded the foundation of Chicago School of Economics. That's it. The government gets that from taxation receipts, so that's where their confidence comes from. The consumers get it from what their reasonable expectations of earnings are, so as that goes up, your confidence increases. And private sector gets it from their sales and forward for sales projection numbers. That's where confidence comes. When those things wobble, like through geological or meteorological or economic wobbles, then people's confidence is wobbles. It's not fixed, it's not immutable, it's not topography, it's the weather, which Pushpa was talking about. So as the weather changes, people's confidence changes. And it's the government's role to give people confidence in those times, which they're doing a pretty reasonable job of in this country at the moment to try and deliver those kind of things. The bit that this industry does, which is challenging, is that only 1 in 5 people is capable of deferring pleasure to improve their confidence. It's well known, it's understood, Pavlov identified it, Freud proved it, and there's lots of work that's gone on since then. That's why people are taking their superannuation and going overseas, because they bring pleasure forward. I've eaten 5 Mentos. I didn't want the Mentos, but I like the ascorbic acid that sits on the outside of them to do it. It's 200 calories. So now I can't have lunch because I'm trying to lose weight. So we're all hopeless at that, right? And we're relatively hopeless. The good part about this cohort is that you help people make good decisions, as Richard talked about, and coach people through those. And the evidence, as Pushpa and Helen were talking about, for that is really clear. When people set up a plan, get the immediate reward and the long-term reward for making those structures, they're fundamentally better off. KiwiSaver is a trick played on people in the same way that the superannuation in Australia is a trick played on people. I love compulsion because people are bad at making decisions, but it moves the cost from the government to the private sector and to the family. That's a cost transference issue. People tend to get better off it when they're economically rewarded, and New Zealand would be, I'm not telling anyone what to do, but all economies everywhere are better when that money is stored in the private sector rather than the public sector, because it takes the burden away from the government. And the future of that is more determined by the people. The challenge is that transition is hard. We love transition shows. Biggest Loser, every car repair show, every garden repair show, because those transitions are fundamental in our nature. Doing it now is tough. It's hard for economies. New Zealand's doing a good job of this. It just takes time and energy, and that's, I guess, what people are talking about. But to say that there's some kind of fantasy outcome by changing policy, yeah, it doesn't work that way, unless you're Adolf Hitler, and that only lasts about 6 years and ends really badly.
I'll add to that Grant Robertson, I think, Jack, you asked Grant a question, why didn't you talk to the private sector about the insurance scheme, and what do you think they would have said if you asked? Well, we would have said it's really hard. Yeah. It's really hard to get this right. It's really hard to support people. It's really hard to manage fraud. It's really hard to make money out of doing this and price it appropriately. It's really, really hard. It's not what you think it is. That's what we would have said to him.
Jake, one of the things I just would like to throw into the mix is how many of you actually have looked at Asian market and their insurance market? They are doing, in some ways, a lot better job than we are in terms of looking after their consumers or their customers.
But they're not, because they rely on giant commissions to drive themselves forward.
No, they are, and in terms of public and private combination, where that is happening, it is working. Where it is only not,
it's
only
a
based on
commission-based system with enormous commissions to salespeople, which rewards people at the sales engine. There are elements of that happening. Singapore is a good example. Parts of Indonesia are where that's done through the religious organisations. But generally, it's large commissions paid to people, which have been driven out of the system in most places in the world because it behaves as a deferred salary to the person. So it's a sales reward system. So there are excellent things about the Asian system, but insurance isn't one of them at the moment.
Okay. We agree to disagree.
Hey, how do you think the events of this year, the storm, Naomi, maybe this is a question for you, and then Faaf, how do you think the events of this year have maybe changed the equation? Because there will have been a lot of New Zealanders. I just remember watching the news and seeing people whose homes had been destroyed being asked gently by a reporter at the scene, do you have insurance? And then you hear that sort of sickening pause afterwards, and you think, what the hell?
Yeah.
But obviously it's something that affects a lot of people.
Well, it's exactly the comment that I made. New Zealanders need to be told to buy insurance by the government because they think it's optional otherwise. And the consequences of it, they're just dire. It's absolutely dire. And I can almost guarantee that every one of those people, if you ask them now, should you have had insurance? Did you wish you had insurance? The answer would be yes. So we have a moment in time when it's very stark. What happens when you don't? Why aren't we talking about it more? And that's what the government can do. That the industry can't, because everyone goes, well, you would say that. Yeah.
Talk to us about that, Faaf.
I guess that's been a difficult discussion. And it started after Christchurch, when people realised the kind of insurance conundrum of a rather large disaster here in New Zealand, and what the possibility of us getting kind of insurance at the same levels was in the future. And then you layer upon that climate change. I used to be Minister of Emergency Management, and some gnarly conversations with communities about their future, because the reality is some of them wouldn't be able to get insurance in the future, and some of those communities are going through that now. I guess it goes to what the Minister of Finance was speaking about before. We don't have these conversations about simple things about money. We don't have enough conversations about protection. I think you call it insurance. I think from a consumer point of view, it's like, why am I buying this? It's like I had a bit of a joke earlier on today, the insurance guy when I was young used to turn up once a year and bugger off. Or we get a calendar and that was it. But, what am I buying here? And for me as a consumer, it's not an insurance policy. It's like, if I die, then my kids are okay. It's protection. And I'm not sure if there's a complete understanding of that from the whole system. So, it goes back to some of the fundamentals. How do we talk about money? How do we talk about risk? There's some good things going in schools. Maybe it's not enough. But that's what my earlier point was. We are all, and my family included at this stage, all having to go through budgets and say we have to do things differently. Now, we haven't done that much in the past, because I think we're all lazy consumers. We get insurance, we do whatever we want to do, and we go live our happy lives. But it's not so happy at the moment. But how do we learn from this to make sure that, okay, when times get better and we have more disposable income, we don't just kind of throw it away on a trip to Australia? Actually, we might need that to make sure that I've got more life insurance, or we've got more insurance covering other things in our life that might go pear-shaped. And I think we're in that space where we can have that conversation now, because people are looking at their money more intensely.
This is the opportunity you talk about, Pushpa.
I guess every challenge a consumer faces is an opportunity for you as a sector, because if you can relate my challenge, my consumer challenge, to an answer, either through your product or through your service or through your conversations or through the people who are sitting in front of me as a consumer, that becomes your opportunity. And I think, especially for insurance sector, I personally, and it's my 100% personal opinion, change the discourse a little bit. Stop talking about insurance, start talking about what's important to you. What have you learned from the current experience of the nation, and what do you think now, at this right time, is the most important thing in your life that you want to protect? And then you have a conversation of ways to protect that most important thing. And not everything that is important to me can be solved by insurance.
I mean, I'll add to that, because I think the sector does an excellent job. And all of the customers we do have are because we're having those conversations. You've got to take people one person at a time. And the comment about fast and easy and cheap is the thing that is broken all over the world in terms of bad consumer outcomes. So actually, this is big amounts of money. It comes in at times when you really need it and you're vulnerable. It has to be right for you. It has to be complicated. It needs to be advised. You need help to do it, and the industry does it well, but there are barriers to people accessing that. There are employers that would do things for their employees, but they're charged FBT. It's cheaper to just give people money and let them do it themselves, right? Like, where's the encouragement in that? There are no tax incentives in New Zealand at all for medical insurance, for example, which take the people who can't afford it, who leave them alone in the public system, and take the people who can look after themselves and get them to do that, right? It's good for everybody, but we disincentivise it. We're one of the few countries in the world. So, it's not the sector, it's the get out of the way of the sector and allow it to do the job that it does really well for the customers that it manages to pull in, and and talk to people about, go talk to someone about this. It's a thing that adults should do because it's the thing that immigrants do. When they come to New Zealand, the first thing they do is buy insurance because they know they've come from a country, there's no government support, it's what you do as an adult. But New Zealanders don't know that, and we're not telling them that.
Yeah.
And hence lies the dilemma. We really need to close the gap between the government and the sector. We really need to be walking on the same pathway with the minimum gap between the two. If we're still going to be in this rack, I've made the regulation, you now follow it, and if you don't follow, you will be penalised.
Pushpa, can I ask you a question? There's two competing systems that work in the world. One system where it's compulsion, and they create a mechanism where there's soft compulsion, which is common in Scandinavia. It's happening a bit in Australia. It's happening in Asia. Then the other system is where they say, well, we'll just let competition drive it, which happens in Western Europe and America. Where do you see the most successful outcomes in those areas? I mean, the best service in the world is Deutsche Bank. The best coverage in the world might be Scandinavia. It's 3% of Scandinavian GDP. Did we all sign up for that? It's currently running that costs in Australia is 3.5% of GDP, up from 1.5 because we inserted the NDIS, which isn't fully. There's talking about compulsion in all insurance. And if compulsion exists, and where it does exist, do they become bloated? And to quote Lord Alcock, absolute power tends to corrupt because they just get flows of capital and do whatever they like forever. So it's complex, right? You can't have both. You can't have this middle path. It doesn't exist.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I'm hearing is there needs to be a really good hard look at settings.
Yeah.
So, you know, financial inclusion is something that we are thinking really hard about at the Reserve Bank. Financial stability is about confidence. And for us, we are trying to work out, you know, how do we wrap that financial inclusion lens across the policy settings and the standards and conditions that we allow financial firms to play in the space. How do we wrap that lens around our settings and our tickets to the game, our licensing conditions? And I think it's a challenge for all of us. How do you wrap that lens around the products and services that you provide so you're actually reaching in with and reaching more consumers that need these products? So, I mean, some of the settings are changing. I mean, we've got, can I talk about legislation? The lawyers in the room, it's very boring, but, you know, we've got the review of the Insurance Prudential Supervision Act. So, I mean, those things are all about consumer confidence, consumers having confidence that their firms can pay out when there is a crisis, that they're resilient, that they have those resources. Same with the Deposit Takers Act reform. So, again, these things go to the heart of consumer confidence, but in all of those things, there's got to be a conversation about proportionality. There's got to be a conversation about inclusion, and are we actually serving the people of New Zealand with those products and services?
Simone, can I ask a slightly different question? I'm sorry to interrupt, Jack, but I work in Australia and a little bit in New Zealand, and one of the conversations, because I go to Europe and America all the time, and when you speak to the Singaporeans who do a brilliant job at running their system, or the Indians who do a great job at running their system, they always say, well, we're not really that asked about Australia because it's so small, we don't really care. Yeah. You know, you're 2% of the world GDP, 1.8% of the world GDP. We don't really need people down there. It's just a rounding error on everything that we do. So to have this system which allows businesses to be there, it has to be economic for people to commit the capital, to deliver the service, to actually make sure that when someone's house is flooded or hit by a volcano or something, that they can actually fund it. Because most of the funding out of that either comes from Japan or Switzerland. It doesn't come from here. So we have to have those settings so that they're right. So your challenge is really well made, but the idea of people walking hand in hand down a sunlit pathway towards the beach together, yeah, it's kind of complex, right? People need to see it.
So what do those settings look like? The ideal setting?
I actually think the gentleman at the end knows a lot more about that than me, so I'll throw that to you.
Yeah, look, to answer your earlier question, you know, do you have free market or do you have compulsion? It's New Zealand, so we always have a hybrid. You know, and that might have something to do with our kind of the way our electoral cycle works. You know, and I won't get into that debate. So you know, I do think there's a sweet spot here in New Zealand for us to be closer, for the sector and government to be closer. Sorry, slipped. And my experience with the FSC engagement and policy, and I think to your point earlier, Naomi, I agree that we should get out of the way and let companies do its thing. But there are policy things like the tax incentives that you mentioned that, I think you should be able to help on those small things, and that's where I think we want this room to be able to help and influence. And also government can help on vision, Michael Cullen had the vision around KiwiSaver, and that became a reality. And I think there's kind of KiwiSaver 2.0, a vision to be had either through a review, which I think is kind of verging on, kind of tinkering plus. But I think it's time to think well beyond what KiwiSaver might be able to be. It's a 5 or 10-year plan, so you can prepare the public conversation for that. Because how can we have that conversation if people don't kind of have the fundamental how do my dollars and cents work conversation first? So, I think to answer the kind of policy question, there is a place for the sector to nudge government and the government to realise that. And I think one of the purposes of this conference is to understand how this sector can nudge and move decision makers, regardless of stripe, into the position where you have more opportunity as a sector. But then also, I think importantly, to Pushpa's point, consumers see that as a real benefit to them, because at the moment they're guarding their dollars like you've never ever seen before.
Yeah. It's confidence is also an interesting one in terms of the language of the government, which is why I keep talking about they need to talk to New Zealanders about money. It's not that many years ago where the media was just full of the government saying how terrible our sector was. All insurance companies are terrible. All investment companies are terrible, especially insurance companies are terrible. Trust me, I felt it, every word. And, you've already got people who don't know what insurance is or why they should have it, can't be bothered paying for it, and now the government's saying, it's all terrible. Because the Australian Royal Commission was coming and there was a push to we need regulations in our market. And the way in which that played out was we'll tell everybody why you need regulations, which is you need protecting from all these terrible people. And for those of us who've been in the industry a long time, it was heartbreaking. Absolutely, because the calling. When you do insurance, it's not short-term money, trust me. And you're convincing people to put more and more and more money in when they're hearing the government saying you're all terrible and going to run you out of town, effectively. Now, they didn't find all those things, certainly not in the life insurance space. There were definitely need for regulations because there was none, and that's not a good thing. And a lot of the regulation is very good, but the language did the damage, right? It wasn't consumers that experienced anything terrible. They were just told what they already thought. Those guys will just rip you off. And so that language damaged confidence enormously, and we haven't recovered from that yet in terms of people's perception of the sector. So there again is something that, and for a political push to drive the need for the requirement for regulation and to grow the regulators, there was damage done to consumers in that process, not just the industry.
I think the other thing we need to be aware of, the sector as a whole, financial products and services, that the needs of your consumers change as their life stages change. So try to have products that are changing according to their life stages. Classic example, my beloved husband refuses to have life insurance. His rationale for not having life insurance is, you're earning, you are insured, house is mortgage free, our daughter is fully settled financially, why the hell do I need life insurance? Who will I leave the money for? So my argument with him was, it's okay, fine, you don't want to insure your life, it's okay. Can you at least buy a funeral insurance so I don't have to spend it, right? At least you can do that much. So it's having that kind of conversation to say, okay, this need is changed, but what else has popped up that might be more suitable for you? Instead of locking people into a policy that is there. Yeah. And also one plea, please try and shorten your documents. They are so long and 0.8 font size. I mean, Good grief. I'm sure you can simplify some of the things in bullet point. And if you can't, please come and talk to us. Few of us will give you some few pointers, and especially when you're talking to different cultural audience.
I'll give the sector some sympathy. I had an experience recently, and as you know, I was responsible for the triple CFA changes. I've recently, so yeah.
You're owning up to it.
Have a laugh at my expense with it.
Yeah, but come on, guys. The documents are designed by the lawyers.
So that's what,
come on. Seriously, they're contracts.
And also
It's
regulators that ask a lot of, we put in the regulations. So my own experience was going to start up a new business, go to the bank and having to fill out, screeds of information. I said, this is quite a lot of documentation. I said, yeah, someone made some changes to the CFA, and therefore I was kind of done by my own petard there.
Doesn't that say something about policy making?
Pardon?
Dare I say, doesn't that say something about policy making?
Well, you can always...
No one's ever said, how's this going to look from a consumer's perspective?
I think this is what Pushpa is getting to. Look, so companies always want to make sure that they're adhering to the regulations, and you've got to make sure that you keep the lawyers happy, as Andrew has said. But that doesn't mean it's a reason to not try and protect consumers or bring in regulation. Regulation, I think, in many cases is a healthy thing. I think, again, to Pushpa's point early, making sure that people understand what that actually means at the coalface is important. That's why, again, I think organisations like the FSC to be able to speak directly to either ministers or senior advisors or policymakers to give that feedback is really important. Otherwise, you're kind of find yourself in a tricky position.
I think developing policy is one thing. Having policy is one thing, and then implementing that policy is entirely different thing. So we need to train those implementers as well, who take literally word by word and in a legal lingo, rather than actually thinking about how is it going to look like when I go out and talk to Pushpa, all right? Or when I go and talk to somebody who's 70-year-old, doesn't really want to buy an insurance, but you can actually prove to them that there is a need for them for health insurance because their health needs are going to be increasing. So I think the key thing to me is that we need regulation, we need policy, we need protection, because at the moment at OECD level we are talking about consumer protection more so than actually building consumer confidence. And every time a story comes out, and as I say, keeping your existing customers and strengthening their confidence in you is hell of a lot cheaper than attracting new customers. Because every time one dissatisfied customer goes out, especially in my community, it doesn't stay with me, it goes out on a wire system. Don't ever go to Kris because he sells bad policies, all right? No, now 150 others might have a very good experience with Kris. It's only Pushpa who had a bad experience. But Pushpa's made sure that 150 know that not to go there.
I think, if I can just, again, do a shout out for the industry. Regulations require us to do a lot of the things you're talking about anyway. And so, it's been a long time since customers were just left with what they bought 50 years ago. So, I think that the biggest issue around consumer confidence for me in our sector is them even understanding what it is that we do. And knowing and being confident to go and get someone to give them advice around that, and even knowing where to go to get that advice. That's our biggest challenge. How do we give them access to someone who can help them understand their needs well before they ever talk to an insurance product provider? So I think that's the challenge for the industry.
Yeah, I had a simple saying when I was Commerce Minister. I wanted people to make wise, informed and motivated decisions about their finances. And it doesn't matter what culture you are, how old you are, that's what we want to instill. There's education in that, there's regulation in that, there's product offering in there, there's confidence in the sector.
But the point's really well made. It's such a complex sector, and Pushka's been talking about this. She did a lot of sales language in that, which I don't think is kind of that helpful, because the most important thing that everyone in this room does is people from chaos into order.
Yeah.
And that's the big piece of work. You don't really get paid for that, which is really annoying. But the reality is that's what happened. And once you've got the chaos into order, and the order comes to better outcomes and then rewards, and then you can repeat that process, which becomes something which fulfills the entire country. But that's challenging, right? Because doing it en masse is really complicated.
Yeah.
And the desire to do it digitally, which is an experiment which has failed over and over and over again around the world. It's done for humans, with humans, to humans. And that's why the future of this industry is really important, and how that gets developed is really important. Break away from the sales conversations. Kris sells bad policies. He doesn't. He takes you from chaos into order. That's what Kris does. Whether Kris does a good job or not, that is an education piece.
just picking
And
up
that's
on
what I
something
mean, is
that,
the discourse needs to be changed.
Sorry, Pushpa made a great point, which relates to what you're saying there around your role. But some of these reforms that are consumer-focused and consumer-oriented take an enormous amount of time to wash through and to then be implemented. So, I mean, the Deposit Takers Act, we're probably looking at a 5-year program. And I know it's a huge challenge for the sector to stay engaged, but we really need you so that those settings and those reforms are relevant when we come out the other end. Same with the depositor compensation scheme, probably a year to 18 months before we see that being implemented. It's quite short, sharp, but we are going to need a lot of engagement so that those settings do actually do the things that we need them to do for consumers.
Yeah.
Very much so.
The one thing I will talk about regulations is that there's been a huge amount in our sector from two angles all at once. And so there's cost and there's effort for companies to try to both engage with the development of that and then implement those things. So if anyone doesn't know, we're in the middle of an FSC 17 upgrade and a change in the solvency standard, plus all the other consumer regulations that are happening at the same time. Enormously expensive for the industry that passes on to consumers because it doesn't go anywhere else. But it's chaotic. I'm sorry. It's been chaotic. In some places we're asked to consult, we're given 5 minutes to consult. In other cases we're asked to consult and then it's, we're going to do another consult. No, we're not. We're going to do something else later. You'll get guidance by here. No, you won't. But you've still got to meet the requirements, but we just can't give you the guidance yet. It's chaotic, and I'm sorry if I'm insulting anyone, but from our point of view, we have no confidence.
Can I ask a question, though?
We have no confidence. How can we pass confidence?
So this is
on
a conversation which I have, which really annoys the guys in Australia, is that if you're waiting for the government to tell you the right thing to do for the consumer, then leave the job and go and work in the traffic police.
Yeah.
Because you know what the right thing to do is. Everyone in this room knows the right thing to do the consumer. You know what needs to be done. You know what they need. You know what the settings are. The government would be worse informed than you. So if waiting for the government to regulate best possible consumer outcomes,
that's not
the
what I
blast
said.
radius is terrifying.
What I said is the cost and the load of lots of regulations all at the same time and not with any kind of planned kind of cycle adds cost and uncertainty to the business that's got to deliver the product to the customer. Not are we delivering the product properly? It's how do we play? How do we play in this space? So if we can get some plan and some timelines and some certainty around how pieces of regulation are going to roll out, we can manage that.
You're talking about a choke point in terms of the compliance burden, right?
100%.
Yeah.
I have full sympathy with your dilemma of changes. Think about poor customer. You are the enlightened lot sitting here who can pick up those changes and implement them with difficulty, with challenges. But me, I don't even know what it is all about and how it is going to benefit me. And why should I listen to you in the first place, right? So think about the consumer as well when you are actually thinking about your challenges. The consumer is facing double challenges, right? So you want to build my confidence. What I'm not sure is, do you want to build my confidence in your product, in your service, in your people, in your reputation, or all of the above?
Yeah. Hey, we've only got a couple of minutes left. Thank you for all of your great questions, guys. Obviously, the panel haven't been backwards and coming forwards and sharing some of their views. Given we've only got a couple of minutes left, I might ask each of you to give us a bit of a closing statement, maybe a closing message to the people in the sector represented here in the room. And let's maybe finish things with a message on opportunity and where perhaps you see a priority, or maybe the number one priority for the sector in improving confidence? We'll start with you, Faaf, and work down the line.
Look, I think that there's plenty to unbundle, but I think if I were to leave one thing, it's I think getting consumers into that wise, informed and motivated space. We have to start at the beginning. Everyone's talked about it for the last 20 years, enough stuffing around. I think get our kids into talking about money, try and move that up the chain so they're making better decisions than their parents at the moment. And I think there's an opportunity now, as I say, I kind of feel like I'm banging on about it, but I don't think we've had a time when people in living memory have been watching their finances as much. And as difficult as that is, I think that's an opportunity for us to say, well, now you're through that, once we are, to be able to have a discussion about making sure that they're ready for whatever might happen again, if we're ever in this position again.
Nice. Pushpa?
For me, just very simple thing. Help me as a consumer to understand what I need, why I need it, and how best I can actually achieve that.
Naomi?
Challenge is yours.
I think we just need to talk about money. New Zealand needs to get over not feeling like it's awkward to talk about money. So you should all go home and talk to your kids about money, and your sisters and your brothers. And because you work in this industry, you know the problem. You can be part of the solution. And the government needs to talk about individual money, not their money, not the tax take, actually what individual people should be thinking about. Because if you have a plan, you have confidence that you can weather a storm, right?
Simone?
Thanks. And I think we've all got a massive challenge ahead of us to maintain and enhance trust and confidence, and certainly take your point, Naomi, that falls back on the regulators as well. So we need to work together really, really well and show leadership in the current economic environment. So we'll certainly be working really hard on that. And my only other plea is just to have that financial inclusion lens across all of your work and to see that as a real opportunity for us.
And Andrew?
I'm last, so I'll be very quick. But I really like the robustness of this conversation. This is probably one of the few countries where you can have a robust conversation like this. Trust me, in Germany, in England, and other places, I say not much on the stage. But this has been a really useful conversation. And so I'll wind up by saying, look, New Zealand's a really robust country, and grit is one of the great characteristics. There is work to do, but it can be done, and the honest conversations are going to drive those things forward. So back to you guys.
Fantastic. Hey, thank you so much for sharing your insights. Won't you join me in thanking Andrew, Simone, Naomi, Pushpa and Kris?